The raven arrived at River Run on a quiet morning, its black wings cutting through the pale sky like a shadow that did not belong. Lysa Tully was standing on the balcony outside her chambers when she saw it circling, and her heart tightened in her chest before it even landed. Ravens never brought anything good. They only carried the things people feared to say out loud. When the Meister broke the seal, Lysa already knew the message was meant for her. Her father had been pushing for a marriage match for months, and she had sensed the conversations happening behind closed doors. But she never imagined this match, not in her wildest fears, not in her quietest hopes. From Lord Tywin Lannister of Casterly Rock, the Meister announced gently, knowing well enough that Lysa did not handle surprises kindly. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the parchment. The words were elegant, sharp, and cold, just like the man who wrote them. Lord Tywin did not ask for things. He declared them. An alliance between House Lannister and House Tully is advantageous to both sides. My son, Sir Jaime Lannister, heir of Casterly Rock, shall wed your daughter, Lysa Tully. The rest of the words blurred. Lysa's breath caught, and suddenly the balcony felt too small, too open, too easy for someone to fall from. Jaime Lannister, golden, arrogant, beautiful Jaime Lannister. The man everyone adored but nobody trusted. Lysa had seen him only a handful of times. At tourneys, at court, always shining like something the gods created just to mock ordinary men and ordinary women. He was the kind of man who made girls dream stupid dreams, dreams that broke them. And she was already broken enough. When she was younger, Lysa might have imagined marrying a knight like him, someone bold, handsome, strong, someone who would look at her and see more than her sharper bones, her trembling hands, her too eager heart. But Jaime Lannister was not that kind of knight. Everyone knew he had eyes for no one but his twin sister, Cersei. The court whispered about it behind fans, behind goblets, behind closed doors. And Jaime never denied for the rumors. He simply smiled that careless, perfect smile and walked away. Lysa pressed a hand to her stomach, as if she could hold down the storm rising in her. A Lannister bride. The idea felt like a trap wrapped in gold. Her father, Lord Hoster Tully, entered her chambers before she could gather herself. His face was stern, but his eyes carried something like hope. Hope mixed with exhaustion. Lysa, he said gently, this is a great honor. Is it? She asked softly. Or is it a cage with lion-colored bars? Hoster sighed, rubbing his temples. We are not in a position to refuse. The Lannisters rarely extend their hand. When they do, it is wise to take it. But Jaime, she paused, unable to shape her fear into words. He does not want a Tully bride. Perhaps not, Hoster admitted, but he will do as his father commands. And you will learn to find your place at his side. His words felt like stones pressing on her chest. Her place, as if she hadn't struggled all her life to feel like she belonged anywhere. Later that evening, Lysa walked alone along the riverbank. The water was calm, whispering against the stones like it was trying to soothe her. She wished she could fall into it and let it carry her somewhere far away. Somewhere no one knew her name or expected anything from her. As the sun dipped behind the walls of River Run, she whispered to the still air, "Why me?" She didn't expect an answer. The gods rarely bothered with girls like her. But far to the west, at Casterly Rock, Jaime Lannister stood in his father's solar, jaw clenched tight as Tywin delivered the same news without a hint of softness. You will marry Lysa Tully, Tywin declared. It is decided. Jaime forced a breath through his teeth. I don't want her. Tywin didn't blink. You don't need to want her. You need to do your duty. Jaime stared at the floor, fighting the urge to grip the sword at his hip. Duty. It was a word his father used like a blade, cutting away everything Jaime actually cared about. In the shadows of that grand, cold room, Jaime knew one truth. This marriage would not be a union. It would be a battlefield. And neither he nor Lysa had any idea how deeply they would wound each other. The next weeks moved far too quickly for Lysa's comfort, as if the entire world had decided her fears were irrelevant. Ravens flew back and forth between River Run and Casterly Rock. Servants whispered about gowns and dowries, and her father walked with a new steadiness in his steps. Alliances made old men stand taller. But Lysa felt smaller with each passing day. Her sister, Catelyn, tried to be kind. She always did. Cat carried herself the way every Tully daughter was expected to. Calm, graceful, obedient. Yet even she couldn't hide the sharp curiosity in her eyes as the wedding drew nearer. "Are you frightened?" Catelyn asked one evening while they embroidered by candlelight. The flames flickered gently, but Lysa's hands still trembled so badly that she jabbed her own fingertip with the needle. She hissed and pulled her hand back. "You are frightened," Cat whispered. Lysa didn't look up. "It isn't fear, it's not knowing." "Jaime Lannister is no monster," Catelyn said softly. Lysa let out a breath that shook slightly. "No, he is beautiful and powerful and careless. That is worse. Monster you can guard against. Careless men crush things without even seeing them." Catelyn hesitated. She didn't argue. Maybe because deep down she knew Lysa was right. Or maybe because even Cat didn't know how to comfort a girl being tied to a lion's claws. Far to the west, Jaime wasn't handling things any better. He rode through the training yard with brutal force, sending young squires stumbling as they tried to parry blows meant to vent his frustration. His golden hair stuck to his forehead with sweat, and his jaw worked furiously as he slammed his sword against another shield. "Ser Jaime," the master-at-arms called carefully, "you're going to break the boy's arm if you keep that pace." "Good," Jaime muttered under his breath, though he dropped the strike. He sheathed his sword, ignoring the eyes watching him. Everyone knew he was angry. The entire rock could feel the tension rolling off him like heat from a forge. And yet no one dared mention the reason. No one except one person. Cersei waited for him in the shadows of the corridor, leaning against a cold stone pillar, with that confident smirk that always made Jaime's defenses fall apart. But this time it didn't weaken him. It infuriated him. "So," she said lightly, tracing a finger along the stone, "you are to marry a trout." His breath caught. "Cersei," she stepped forward, eyes gleaming with a cruel kind of amusement. "Father thinks he can separate us. He forgets who we are." Jaime swallowed hard. He never feared battle, never feared enemies, never feared kings. But Cersei, she could undo him with a whisper. "I don't want this," he said softly. She lifted his chin with her fingers. "Then don't let it change you. It changes everything." Cersei's smile vanished. "Only if you let it." He didn't answer because he knew she was wrong. When Jaime left Cersei behind, he felt something ugly settle inside him. A resentment that wasn't about Lysa at all. Back in Riverrun, Lysa's wedding preparations became an endless parade of dress fittings, feasts, and smiling faces pretending this was all a celebration rather than a sacrifice. Even the Septons spoke to her as though she should be grateful for the match. The morning she was to leave Riverrun for the journey west, she stood alone in her room, staring at the chest that held her wedding gown. A gown woven with silver threads and pearls. More beautiful than anything she had ever worn. But it didn't feel hers. It felt like something she was being buried in. The door creaked open and Peter Baelish slipped inside. "I heard you depart today," he said softly. Lysa's heart tightened painfully. Peter had always been the one place her emotions slipped out, messy and unwanted. She had adored him once, foolishly, blindly, and he had adored Catelyn instead. Even now, he smiled at Lysa, but it was the smile he used on everyone, practiced, careful, never quite reaching his eyes. "You look troubled," he said. She gave a bitter little laugh. "I am being sent to marry a man who does not want me." Troublesome seems expected. Peter stepped closer, lowering his voice. "A wife can learn to influence her husband, even one as proud as Jaime Lannister." Lysa shook her head. "I do not want to influence him. I simply don't want to disappear." Peter's expression flickered. Something almost like real softness there. Or perhaps she only imagined it because she was desperate. "You won't," he murmured. "Not if you learn the right way to be seen." Lysa didn't know what that meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to. As the sun climbed in the sky and the time came to mount her horse, she looked back at Riverrun, her home, her safety, her entire world, and felt a coldness settle deep inside her. She was riding toward a lion's den, And somewhere in the depths of Casterly Rock, Jaime Lannister felt the same chill. Two people bound together by duty, resentment, and fear. Neither ready for the other, neither knowing how deeply their marriage would cut. The journey to Casterly Rock was long, winding, and heavy with silence. Lysa rode between her father's bannermen, surrounded by the red and blue banners of House Tully, yet she had never felt more alone. Every clop of the horse's hooves sounded like a countdown to something she wasn't prepared to face. The closer they traveled to the western lands, the more the world changed. The rivers thinned, the air grew drier, and the hills became sharp with jutting stone. She missed the soft green of River Run, the sound of water everywhere she walked. Here, the landscape felt unforgiving. Fitting, she supposed. Lions did not live in gentle places. When they first saw the rock, it rose from the land like a mountain carved into a fortress by the gods themselves. Immense, imposing. Golden banners flapped in the wind like they were mocking her. The closer Lysa came, the smaller she felt. Inside the great gate, a host of Lannister guards waited, armor polished to a shine, expressions unreadable. And beside them, waiting with the perfect knight's posture, was Jaime Lannister himself. He looked exactly as she remembered from the tourneys, handsome in a way that turned girls foolish, golden hair catching sunlight, green eyes sharp enough to cut. But those eyes weren't warm, they weren't welcoming. He watched her approach the way one studies a debt they never agreed to pay. Lysa dismounted slowly, trying not to let her knees shake. Jaime stepped forward, just enough to keep things proper. No more. My lady, he said with a polite bow that felt colder than winter rain. Sir Jaime, she answered softly. Their eyes met. Something passed between them, though she couldn't name it. Not quite anger, not quite indifference. More like two people staring across a chasm they'd been forced to bridge. Behind Jaime, Tywin Lannister descended the stone steps like a shadow given form. He greeted Lord Hoster warmly, but when his gaze shifted to Lysa, she felt it like a blade resting against her throat. Not cutting, but promising it could. Welcome to Casterly Rock, Tywin said, with the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all. Lysa curtsied because it was expected. Jaime stood beside her like a statue carved from gold, unmoving, unreadable. She already felt trapped. That evening, a feast was held in her honor. Though she suspected few were truly there for her, the hall glittered with candles and polished metal, yet the air was colder than any winter she had known. The Lannisters were wealthy beyond reason, but warmth was not something they spent easily. Cersei Lannister arrived fashionably late, sweeping into the hall with the grace of a queen and the confidence of someone who knew she owned every room she walked into. She looked at Lysa for only an instant, a brief up and down that held more judgment than an entire sept could deliver. Welcome to our home, Cersei said, though her tone suggested Lysa was an intruder. Thank you, Lysa replied with a bow of her head. Cersei's eyes slid to Jaime, lingered, then returned to Lysa with a smile sharp enough to draw blood. I do hope you find the rock comfortable. Lysa forced a small smile. I am sure I will. Cersei leaned closer, voice like honey laced with poison. It is a hard place to live, harder still to tame. People get lost in it. Lysa exhaled slowly. I am not here to tame anything. No, Cersei murmured, staring straight into her eyes. You are here to endure. Jaime watched the exchange from across the table, brow tightening. For a moment, Lysa thought he might intervene, but then his gaze flicked away. Dismissive, uninterested. The feast blurred around her. Music played, goblets filled, people laughed, but Lysa felt like she was watching everything from behind a wall of glass. Every now and then, her eyes drifted to Jaime. He laughed easily with the knights beside him. He listened when his father spoke. He leaned close when Cersei whispered something to him. He never once looked toward his bride-to-be. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she didn't care. But as the feast went on, that cold place inside her, the one that had started forming the day the raven arrived, began to spread. Later, after the hall emptied, Jaime found her standing alone near a window overlooking the sea. He approached quietly, almost reluctantly. You are settling in, I hope, he asked, though his tone made it sound like a duty, not a question. I am trying, she said honestly. His jaw tightened a little. Good. Silence stretched between them. Sir Jaime, she began carefully, I know you did not choose this, just as I did not, but perhaps we can try to make something peaceful of it. His eyes flicked toward hers, not harshly, but not kindly either. More like someone considering a path they knew they couldn't take. You seem a decent woman, Lysa, he said quietly, but peace is not always mine to give. She swallowed. Because of your father? Because of many things. He didn't explain. She didn't ask. When he walked away, Lysa realized she hadn't expected warmth, but she'd hoped for something. Even a little crack in the golden armor. But Jaime Lannister's heart was locked away somewhere she could never reach. And she wasn't sure what scared her more, the idea of trying to open it, or the possibility that someone else already had. The days that followed passed in a haze of formality and forced politeness. Lysa was shown every corner of Casterly Rock, though shown was generous. She was escorted, watched, and guided as if she were a visiting noble who might steal something if left unattended. Servants bowed respectfully, but their eyes were sharp, curious, measuring. Some looked at her with pity, others with suspicion, none with warmth. Casterly Rock was beautiful in its own rigid way. Its halls were carved from pale stone that gleamed like gold in the torchlight. Its stairways twisted like veins through a giant's body. Its chambers echoed with centuries of power and pride. But it was nothing like River Run. There were no flowing streams, no gentle air, no softness. Everything here felt heavy, weighty, watching her. The only person who treated her with any genuine politeness was Tyrion Lannister. He approached her on her second morning, limping slightly as he crossed the courtyard, where she sat pretending to enjoy the sun. "My lady," he greeted, bowing with exaggerated formality. "Welcome to my family's lovely, stony prison. Consider me your fellow inmate." Lysa blinked, startled. "Oh, Lord Tyrion." "Just Tyrion. I am not nearly impressive enough to deserve the full title." A reluctant smile tugged at Lysa's lips. "I doubt that." "Tully courtesy," he said with an approving nod. "Rarer here than you might think." He sank onto the bench beside her with no regard for status or propriety, and for the first time since she had arrived, Lysa felt herself exhale. "You look trapped," Tyrion observed casually, as if commenting on the weather. Lysa hesitated. "I suppose I am. Aren't we all?" He leaned back and folded his hands over his stomach. "My father has a talent for arranging our futures without the slightest interest in our desires. That much is clear," Lysa murmured. Tyrion's eyes gleamed with sharp intelligence. "Jaime is not the easiest match, I imagine you have noticed." She lowered her gaze to her hands. "He does not want this marriage." "No," Tyrion said truthfully, "but neither do you." Lysa looked up at him then, really looked at him, and realized Tyrion wasn't mocking her. He wasn't pitying her. He was simply telling the truth. She nodded slowly. "I just do not know what kind of man he is." Tyrion smirked. "Most people don't. Jaime is all charm and arrogance on the outside. On the inside," he shrugged. "Well, no one has gotten close enough to find out, except perhaps one person who shouldn't count." Lysa didn't need him to explain who that was. Cersei. Always Cersei. The name hung unspoken, but the meaning was loud. That evening, another supper was held, smaller, quieter, meant for immediate family. Lysa sat beside Jaime, who sat beside Cersei, who didn't bother hiding her disdain. Tywin presided at the head of the table like a lord carved from solid iron, eyes flicking between his children, with the slightest narrowing every time he caught Jaime not paying attention. How a man could be so powerful and yet so utterly devoid of warmth baffled Lysa. Food was served, wine poured, conversation forced. Jaime barely spoke to her, though he answered politely when she tried. His responses were short, neat, practiced, just enough to keep up appearances, never enough to form anything real. At one point, Lysa reached for the same dish he did, their fingers brushing, barely, softly, accidentally. She flinched. So did he. Cersei's gaze snapped to their hands like a hawk spotting prey. "You're jumpy," Cersei said sweetly. Lysa forced a breath. It was nothing. Oh, I saw, Cersei replied, leaning in. My brother does have that effect. Some find his touch overwhelming. Jaime shot her a warning look, but Cersei ignored him. Tywin, without raising his voice, cut through the tension. Enough. Cersei sat back, masking her smirk with a sip of wine. Jaime stared down at his plate. Lysa felt heat rise in her cheeks. Shame, anger, humiliation, all knotting together until she couldn't breathe. After supper, she walked alone through a dim corridor, trying to calm the twisting in her chest. The rock's cold air did little to help. You handled my sister better than most, Jaime said suddenly, stepping out from a side hall. Lysa startled. I didn't handle anything. She humiliated me. Jaime exhaled through his nose. Cersei likes to test people. Does she test your betrothed for sport? Lysa whispered. His jaw clenched. She's protective. Of you, Lysa said before she could stop herself. Their eyes met. For a moment, the walls between them cracked. Jaime looked torn, not between duty and desire, but between truth and denial. He finally spoke quietly. You are blameless in this match, Lysa, but do not expect it to be easy. I never expected easy, she answered. I only hoped for honesty. He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time she saw something flicker in his eyes that wasn't cold, wasn't distant, regret, just a sliver. Then it vanished. We should both temper our hopes, Jaime said softly. This marriage is a duty, nothing more. Lysa absorbed the words like a wound. Nothing more, but she nodded because she had no choice. He walked away, golden armor gleaming in the torchlight, and for the first time Lysa wondered what was more painful, marrying a man who didn't want her, or slowly learning that she might start wanting him anyway. The morning of the wedding arrived with a sky the color of dull steel. No sunlight broke through, no warmth seeped into the cold stone walls of Casterly Rock. Lysa had hoped for a brighter day, though she knew better than to take it as an omen. The gods did not choose sides in unhappy marriages. The maids dressed her in a gown of deep blue silk, embroidered with silver thread that shimmered whenever she moved. It was beautiful, painfully so, and she couldn't help but feel like she was being wrapped in someone else's life. Every stitch, every pearl, every flower woven into the fabric had been chosen by Lannister hands, not hers. You look radiant, my lady, one of the maids whispered. Lysa attempted a smile. It felt thin. Her hands were trembling again, something that had become far too familiar since her arrival. She pressed them against her skirts, hoping no one would notice. When the time came, she was escorted to the sept carved into the heart of the rock. High ceilings, golden sconces, walls draped in crimson. It was grand, powerful but hollow, like everything in this place. Jaime waited at the altar. He looked perfect, of course. Golden armor polished to a shine, hair brushed back in neat waves, posture straight as a blade. The kind of groom every girl dreamed of. Except he wasn't dreaming, and neither was she. Their eyes met for only a second before he looked away. But in that second, Lysa saw something she hadn't expected. Not coldness, not annoyance. Resignation. The ceremony began. The septon spoke, the vows were said, and when Jaime took her hands, his fingers were steady while hers shook. When the time came for the kiss, Jaime paused. Barely noticeable, but she felt it. He leaned down, brushed his lips lightly against hers, and stepped back with the efficiency of a man completing a task. The crowd applauded. Lysa felt nothing. The wedding feast was louder, brighter, and more extravagant than she could stand. Lannister lords and ladies toasted loudly, musicians played relentlessly, and wine flowed like rivers. Everyone celebrated. Everyone except the bride and groom. Jaime sat beside her, answering every attempt at conversation with polite, empty words. His gaze drifted to Cersei every few minutes, and each time Cersei responded with a look of her own, sharp, possessive, angry. Lysa felt every glance like a thorn under her skin. Tyrion eventually slid into the seat on Lysa's other side, raising a goblet to her in greeting. Surviving, I see. Barely, she whispered. Tyrion chuckled. Adjust your expectations, my lady. Marriage in this family rarely comes with joy. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to cry. She did neither. After endless toasts, dances, and forced smiles, Tywin finally rose to signal the feast's end. The hall quieted instantly in the way it always did when he stood. "It is time," he said simply. Lysa's stomach tightened with dread. Jaime stiffened. Cersei's expression cracked, only for the briefest moment, revealing fury so raw, Lysa felt it like heat. And then Jaime stood. He offered Lysa his arm. She hesitated for half a heartbeat before placing her hand lightly atop it. Jaime's muscles tensed beneath her fingers. Together, they walked out of the hall as the crowd cheered behind them. The closer they came to the bridal chamber, the heavier each step grew. The door loomed large, carved with lions and flowers. A door meant to seal a union neither of them wanted. Inside the room, candles flickered softly, bathing everything in a warm glow. A bed in the center, draped in red and gold. Wine on the table. Rose petals scattered by careful hands. It felt staged, artificial, like a scene set up for spectators who were no longer watching. Jaime closed the door behind them. Silence filled the room. For a long moment, he didn't move. Lysa stood by the bed, unsure of where to put her hands, unsure of what to do, unsure of how to exist in this moment. He finally spoke, voice low. "I won't touch you." Lysa blinked, heart pounding. "What?" "I won't consummate this marriage," Jaime said more firmly. "Not tonight, not ever if you don't want it." Her breath shuddered. "But your father, he can force many things," Jaime said. "But not this." Lysa stared at him, unsure whether to feel relieved, insulted, or both. He ran a hand through his hair and looked away. "You deserve someone who wants this. I don't. And I won't pretend I do." Lysa swallowed. "I don't want a forced thing, Jaime, but I had hoped we might at least try to be something, not lovers, not even friends, but not enemies." Jaime's expression softened, the smallest shift, but a real one. "I don't want to be your enemy." She stepped closer, just enough to show she wasn't afraid. "Then don't push me away before I even try." For the first time since she'd come to the Rock, Jaime really looked at her, not as a buddy, not as a problem, but as a woman standing in front of him with hope she was afraid to admit. "This marriage is complicated," he said quietly. "I know. There are things you don't understand. I know." He exhaled slowly. "I don't want to hurt you." Lysa met his eyes. "Then don't." The tension between them changed then. Not warmth, not affection, but a fragile beginning. A crack in the wall. Jaime stepped back, gesturing to the bed. "I'll sleep on the sofa." "Jaime, Lysa whispered, surprising herself. "We could just talk." He paused, and then he nodded. So they talked, awkwardly, haltingly, until the candles burned low. Two strangers, bound by duty. Two hearts, equally afraid. For the first time, Lysa thought maybe this marriage didn't have to break her. Not if they both learned how to bend. The days after the wedding were quiet, almost oddly so. No grand conflicts, no storms, just silence. A careful, delicate kind of silence that hung between Lysa and Jaime everywhere they went. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. They behaved like two people walking on ice that hadn't cracked yet, listening for every sound beneath their feet. Jaime remained distant, yet polite. He never raised his voice, never acted cruelly, never dismissed her presence. But he also never sought her out. Every conversation they had began with Lysa, not him. Some days she resented that, other days she understood. He had been forced into this marriage just as she had. Still, something had shifted between them. The night they married, when he refused to consummate the union, he had drawn a faint line of trust between them. Fragile but real. Lysa clung to it. One afternoon, she wandered into one of the balconies overlooking the crashing waves below the Rock. The sea was loud today, churning and roaring against the cliffs, as if angry with the world itself. Lysa found comfort in it. Noise made her thoughts quieter. She didn't hear Jaime approach until he spoke. "You come here often." She startled slightly but nodded. "It's one of the few places in the Rock that still feels alive." Jaime leaned against the stone railing. "You prefer River Run." "Of course," he hummed softly. "I don't blame you. The Rock isn't gentle." "Neither are the people," she said before she could stop herself. Jaime's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite irritation. Something in between. True enough, they stood there for a moment, the wind pulling at their hair, the sea roaring like a restless beast below. Lysa risked a question she had been holding on to. Do you ever feel trapped here? Jaime didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. Every day. The honesty startled her. Why? He hesitated again, then shrugged in that careless way he used to hide real feelings. Because this place was built to hold lions, not men. Lysa didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything. Sometimes silence was safer. But Jaime turned then, studying her face with an expression she couldn't decipher. You're not what I expected, Lysa. Her heart jumped. What did you expect? A frightened girl, he admitted. Timid, weak, someone who would cry over every harsh word. Is that what your father told you? No, Jaime said. That's what I assumed. Lysa frowned. Because I'm not a Lannister? His expression tightened slightly, guilt flickering in his eyes. Maybe. Lysa held his gaze. I may not be strong in the way your house values, but I'm not fragile. He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, she saw a hint of respect forming there. Before either of them could speak again, footsteps echoed behind them. Cersei swept onto the balcony like a gust of cold wind, her golden hair perfectly arranged, her expression sharp enough to cut stone. Brother, she said, voice dripping honey that everyone knew was poison. I've been looking for you. Jaime stiffened almost imperceptibly. Cersei's eyes flicked to Lysa, lingering on her like she was an insect stuck in a web. Enjoying the view, my lady. Lysa straightened her shoulders. The sea reminds me of home. How lovely, Cersei replied, though you are not in Riverrun anymore. The words were gentle. The warning wasn't. Before Lysa could respond, Cersei linked her arm with Jaime's and pulled him slightly toward her, though it looked casual to anyone who didn't know better. We have matters to discuss, Cersei said, not looking at him but at Lysa, as if daring her to protest. Jaime hesitated, glancing at Lysa for just a heartbeat. Something conflicted passed across his face, something almost like apology. Then he allowed himself to be led away. Lysa watched them go, feeling a familiar coldness settle in her stomach. It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't anger. It was the heavy, helpless feeling of being pushed aside. Again. Always. Later that night, Jaime returned to their chambers late. Lysa was seated by the fireplace, pretending to read but not really absorbing a single word on the page. He paused at the door. You're awake, he said quietly. I don't sleep easily here, she answered honestly. Jaime removed his cloak and set it aside. Cersei can be intense. Lysa didn't respond. For what it's worth, Jaime added, she shouldn't have spoken to you like that. Lysa lifted her gaze to his. Then why did you let her? The question landed between them like a thrown dagger. Jaime swallowed. It's complicated. It always is, Lysa whispered. He sat across from her, closer than usual, elbows resting on his knees. Cersei and I, she shook her head. You don't have to explain. I've known since King's Landing. Jaime's brow nodded. Known what? Lysa met his gaze steadily. That she holds a part of you no one else can reach. He didn't answer. The silence was enough. Lysa closed her book, hands steady even though her heart wasn't. I don't want your secrets, Jaime. I don't want your love. I only want your honesty. Jaime studied her for a long moment, longer than he ever had before. Finally, he said softly, I don't know if I can give you all of that. But you can give some, she said. That's all I'm asking. He exhaled slowly, the firelight softening the rigid lines of his face. You deserve more than what this marriage is. Lysa's voice lowered. Maybe. But this is the marriage we have. Jaime looked away, jaw tightening. When he spoke again, his voice held something new, something torn. I am trying, Lysa. She nodded. So am I. And for the first time, the space between them felt less like a battlefield, and more like the very beginning of a fragile truce. Weeks passed, each one smoothing, just barely, the jagged edges between Lysa and Jaime. They weren't close, not truly, but they had begun to understand each other in ways she never expected. Jaime spoke more freely around her, sometimes even laughed in her presence. Small things, but real things. Lysa, in turn, learned the rhythms of the rock. She learned which quarters stayed warm, which servants she could trust, and which she could not. She learned where Jaime spent his mornings, where Cersei spent her afternoons, how Tywin's presence made every room fall silent. But the most important thing she learned was this. There were cracks in the Lannister dynasty. Cracks she wasn't meant to see. Cracks that widened every time Jaime and Cersei stood near each other. One evening, Lysa walked into the solar where Jaime often practiced writing letters, a habit he claimed Tywin forced on him. She entered quietly, intending only to bring a message from a visiting bannerman. Jaime's voice stopped her at the doorway. "No, Cersei," he said sharply. "Not here." Lysa froze. Cersei stood near his desk, too close, her hand resting on Jaime's arm. Jaime pulled away like her touch burned him. "You've changed," Cersei hissed, "since she came." Jaime rubbed a hand across his face. "I am married now. You know things cannot be the same." Cersei stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Because of her? That timid Riverlands girl you barely speak to?" "Because it's wrong," your Doheny snapped. The words shook Lysa so deeply she felt her heartbeat in her throat. Cersei stared at him as if he'd struck her. "You never said that before." "I'm saying it now." Lysa's breath hitched. Jaime had changed, but not because he suddenly loved her. She wasn't foolish enough to imagine that. He had changed because, for the first time, he was being forced to look at himself. Cersei's voice twisted low. "She is turning you against me." "No," Jaime said, quieter now. "You're turning me against myself." A moment later, Cersei stormed out of the room and nearly collided with Lysa. For a heartbeat, neither woman moved. Cersei's eyes flickered with something vicious, something wounded. "Listening at doors now?" she asked softly. Her voice like velvet wrapped around steel. Lysa lifted her chin. "I didn't mean to overhear." "And yet you did." Cersei leaned closer, her breath brushing Lysa's cheek. "You're poisoning him. One sigh at a time." Lysa didn't flinch. Maybe he's simply opening his eyes. A flash of something savage crossed Cersei's face. Not jealousy, but something far deeper. Something dangerous. Without another word, Cersei swept down the corridor, skirts swirling behind her like smoke. Lysa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. When she stepped into the solar, Jaime was slumped in his chair, hands pressed to his temples. He didn't notice her at first. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. He lifted his head slowly. "How much did you hear?" "Enough," he cursed under his breath. "Lysa, You don't need to explain," she said. "Not everything is my concern." His eyes softened. "Some of it is." She hadn't expected that. Jaime stood, pacing a little, frustration radiating off him. "My sister, Cersei is forceful. She presses. She doesn't like change." He rubbed the back of his neck. "This is difficult for her." Lysa folded her hands. "It's difficult for everyone." He stopped pacing and looked at her. Really looked at her, as though only now realizing she wasn't just a burden placed upon him. "Are you angry with me?" he asked quietly. Lysa hesitated. "No, but I am tired." "Of me? Of being in the middle of battles that are not mine?" Jaime winced slightly. "I don't want you to feel that way." "Then don't make me feel that way," she whispered. Silence fell, thick and heavy. Then Jaime stepped closer, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she felt the heat of him, the turmoil. "You're stronger than I thought," he said softly. "You keep saying that." "Because you keep proving it." She swallowed, not trusting her voice. Jaime reached for the goblet on the desk and poured himself wine, though his hands trembled faintly. "I don't know what I'm doing, Lysa. For the first time in my life, I truly don't." "Maybe that means you're finally doing something right." He let out a breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. When he spoke again, his voice was low. "I don't want to hurt you, and yet everything I do seems to put you in pain's way." Lysa shook her head. "You're not hurting me, Jaime. Not in the way you think." He looked puzzled. "Then how?" She took a slow breath. "By standing close enough that I begin to hope, and then stepping away again." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Jaime froze. His eyes softened in a way she had never seen, a quiet, aching softness that made her chest tighten painfully. Lysa, he whispered. She shook her head quickly, turning away. Forget I said anything. No, he said, stepping closer. I won't. Their silence now was different, charged, fragile, trembling with possibilities neither of them knew how to face. Finally, Jaime exhaled. You deserve better than this marriage. Better than me. And yet, she whispered, here we are. Their eyes locked. For a moment, the world outside that room fell away. No Tywin, no Cersei, no duty. Just two people caught between what they wanted and what they feared. Jaime broke the moment first, looking away. I should go, he murmured. Lysa nodded, though her heart clenched. When Jaime reached the doorway, he paused, just once, and said quietly, I am trying, Lysa. Maybe more than you know. She watched him leave, her pulse unsteady, her thoughts twisted into knots. He was trying, and she was falling, slowly, dangerously, and she didn't know if she could stop. The first real crack in the fragile peace came with a raven. It arrived at dawn, tapping against the window of the solar with frantic wings. A servant brought it to Jaime, who read the message with a face that slowly drained of color. He left the room without a word, the parchment clenched in his fist. Lysa didn't see him for the rest of the day. She knew something was wrong. Jaime never hid himself unless he was wrestling with something heavier than duty. By sunset, she found him on the cliffs overlooking the sea, alone, windblown, staring toward the horizon as if waiting for something to rise out of it. Jaime, she said softly. He didn't turn at first. He simply held out the raven's message for her to take. When she unfolded it, her heart sank. Lord Tywin commands Jaime Lannister to ride east with a host of Lannister men. A rebellion is stirring in the Riverlands. Minor lords refusing taxes, harassing envoys, threatening war. Jaime is to restore order immediately. A war brewing in her home. A war Jaime was being sent to crush. Lysa's throat tightened painfully. My father's bannermen are rebelling. River Run will be dragged into this. Jaime nodded once, jaw set hard. Tywin wants it handled quickly and ruthlessly. And he's sending you? Of course he is, Lysa swallowed. Will you do it? Will you be ruthless with my people? Jaime finally turned, and the look in his eyes startled her. He looked torn, in a way she had never seen before. I don't want to hurt your home, he said quietly, but I cannot defy my father. You defied your sister, she whispered. That is not the same. No, she agreed, but it means you are capable of choosing. He looked away, wind pulling at his golden hair. If I refuse, Tywin will send Gregor Clegane or someone worse, and the Riverlands would bleed far more under their hand than mine. Lysa knew he was right, but that didn't make it easier. When do you leave? She asked, voice barely steady. Tomorrow. Her breath hitched. So soon? Jaime stepped closer, lowering his voice. I don't want to go. Not like this. Lysa's heartbeat stumbled. Not like what? His eyes held hers, unguarded for once. Not when things between us are finally changing. The wind roared, the waves crashed, but all she heard was the tremor in his voice. Before she could speak, footsteps echoed behind them. Cersei, her presence sliced through the air like a blade. So, Cersei said, crossing her arms, you're going to war for father. Jaime stiffened, withdrawing from Lysa by instinct, the closeness between them snapping back to something safer, colder. Cersei's eyes flicked between them, sharp, calculating. Don't let this little dove fill your head with guilt, she said. River lords rebel all the time. Put them down and come home. Jaime's jaw tightened. It's not that simple. It is, Cersei said. You do what father commands. That's what you've always done. It's what you are. Lysa stepped forward before she could stop herself. He is more than your father's blade. Cersei's eyes narrowed. Speak again, little trout, and I'll have you. Enough, Jaime snapped, louder than Lysa had ever heard him speak to his sister. Lysa is my wife. The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Cersei stared at him, betrayal twisting her beautiful features into something ugly and raw. You're choosing her over me. Jaime's face pinched with pain. I'm choosing what's right. Cersei's voice dropped to a whisper, sharp enough to cut bone. When you come back, Jaime Lannister, don't expect to find me waiting. She spun and stormed away. For the first time, Jaime didn't follow. That night, Jaime knocked softly on the door to their chamber. Lysa opened it to find him standing there. No armor, no confidence. Just a man uncertain of himself. I wanted to say goodbye, he said. Lysa nodded and stepped aside to let him in. They spoke in low voices, careful and fragile. Jaime told her he feared what would happen in the Riverlands. Lysa told him she feared for him more than she feared for the rebellion. He promised he'd try to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. She promised she would hold Riverrun in her prayers. Finally, when the fire had died to embers, Jaime said quietly, I don't know what will happen when I return. Lysa swallowed, her heart aching. Nor do I. He hesitated, then slowly reached out, gently brushing his fingers against hers. Not a lover's touch, not a claim, just connection. I am trying, he whispered again. Lysa squeezed his hand back. Then come back to me, and we can try together. His eyes softened. Lysa, she stepped closer, but only for a moment. Enough to feel the warmth of him, enough to let the moment live without pushing it further. Go do what you must, she said softly, but do it as Jaime, not as your father's shadow. He nodded, lowering his forehead to hers for a breath of time that felt like an entire confession. When he pulled away, she felt the loss more deeply than she should. Jaime walked to the door, paused, and looked back at her with something unspoken flickering in his eyes. Then he left. Dawn came too soon. Lysa stood at the window watching Jaime ride out at the head of his host. Shining armor, red cloak flowing behind him like a flame. She didn't know what would become of him, or of them, but she knew this much. Their marriage had begun as a duty. It was becoming something different, something fragile, something dangerous. Something that might break them, or finally make them whole. Only time and war would decide.